everyone. My name is Katie DeCristofaro, and I'll be presenting to you my findings that have informed my research proposal related to Massachusetts charter schools and their publicly reported standardized test results. So my research question is, who fills Massachusetts charter school seats, and how does it impact the standardized testing reported compared to traditional public schools? More specifically, as it relates to Massachusetts charter schools, my proposal has been informed by this research question. Because of the differences between TPSs and charter schools, I wanted to understand why they were reporting in many instances that their MCAS scores were higher, and therefore better understand why a policy was in place dictating how many charters could be operational throughout the state. This led to interesting findings related to charter schools and their student population, which may shed some light on why their standardized test results were being reported as higher throughout the state than the TPSs in the Commonwealth. Because I wasn't totally familiar when I started learning about charter schools of what they were, I figured I'd give you a little overview. So they're a kind of publicly funded school choice option created by state legislature in 1993, with 71 in operation to date and serving approximately 37,402 students. They operate independently of any school committee under a 5-year agreement and must be approved by way of application by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They're run by a board of trustees who cannot have any private sector affiliation, and they're allowed more freedoms such as organization of their core mission, curriculum, theme, and/or teaching method, control of their budget, and the hiring and firing of teachers and staff. School days and hours are also dictated by the amount of school days, I should say, and hours are also dictated by the board of trustees, and it's common that both are longer in comparison to TPSs. They must demonstrate their positive results in certain areas, such as specific enrollment parameters within 5 years of operation, or they're at risk of being put on probation or losing their charter altogether. Admission is through an application process. If more applicants than availability, acceptance is then granted through a lottery system. They're funded by traditional public schools' budgets, and they may receive grants from their benefactors. There can be no more than 120 charter schools in operation at one time, with exceptions made for certain districts related to spending caps. I just thought that this was kind of an interesting chart. It shows, especially if you live in Massachusetts, it shows where in the Commonwealth the charter schools are located, and not surprisingly, a lot of the cities that have more than one charter are in densely populated cities. In terms of the literature review, I am giving you two sides of the coin. So the first is the related to charter schools and the positive aspects. So charter schools are meant to serve those whom are underserved in TPSs for the most part, such as students with disabilities, English language learners, minorities, and low-income students, or any combination of those. A great deal of charter schools reviews after the 5 years surrounds these enrollment parameters. So given that, positive MCAS results cited by the charter schools and outperformance compared to traditional public schools is uplifting, given the mission of them. So there's just a quote that says, on the 2014 MCAS, a higher percentage of students scored proficient or advanced in every subject and at every grade level when compared with their peers in traditional public schools. However, some argue that charter schools' standardized test results are not fairly or accurately compared to TPSs, given the differences in student population. So, while there are various arguments, my focus is primarily related to low-income SPED and ELL populations. DESE charter school performance reports and district data legitimately show positive outcomes academically for their student population. On the 2015 Park exam, for example, the Edward Brooke charter schools in Boston were the highest performing in the entire state, outscoring wealthy suburbs such as Carlisle, Brookline, Newton, Wellesley, and more. School performance and student growth in certain subjects is key to understanding standardized test scores, particularly in reading and math. On average, students in charter schools learn significantly more than their virtual counterparts in reading and mathematics. The typical student in charter school gains more learning in a year than the TPS counterpart, amounting to about 1.5 months of additional gains in reading and 2.5 months in math. SPED students in charter schools make up 12% compared to 16% in traditional public schools statewide. SPED students in charter schools see significantly larger growth in reading and math than their counterparts at TPSs. So the Credo study, which is cited below here and cited throughout the presentation, indicated that SPED was difficult to compare and report on given the small number of SPED students, regardless of what school they attended. So while they did report on it, they wanted to make that known. ELL students have similar learning gains in math, whether they attend a charter school or a TPS, but those in charter schools have significantly lower learning gains in reading than their TPS counterparts. And 44% of charter schools outpace the learning impacts of TPS in reading, and 56% do so in math. So there's no doubt that there's been a proven track record in low-income minority students. Mass Charter Public School Association reported a few of these findings, such as charter schools consistently outperforming TPSs across the state. Independent studies show that they're closing the achievement gap between the low-income African American and Latino children in comparison to the affluent white children. A higher percentage of students in charter schools scored proficient or advanced in all subjects at every grade level, with their TPS peers on the MCAS in 2014, and many urban charters with a high percentage of African American, Latino, and low-income students ranked first in the state, outperforming affluent suburban districts. So proclamation and rebuttal, again related to low-income population. I'll let you read this quote here about Mystic Valley Regional Charter School and how well they did on their MCAS. The rebuttal here is that in FY14, the poverty rate of students at Mystic Valley Charter School, which is comprised of cities such as Malden, Peterborough, Everett, and Medford, which, for those of you who aren't aware, they are located just outside of Boston, is half that of Medford and Peabody, 29% of Malden's, and 21% of Everett's. And from 2010 to 2014, an average of 20% of Mystic Valley students were living in poverty, whereas during the same period, so you have your 20% here, noting that Peabody and Medford had an average poverty rate of 32.5%, Malden was at 60%, and Everett at 75%. So the 20% is pale in comparison to the cities that are comprised of that district. Similar proclamations and reported rebuttals were stated regarding the Sturgis Charter School, which is comprised of towns such as Dennis, Yarmouth, Sandwich, and Barnstable, which is located in Cape Cod, and the Boston Collegiate Charter School. MCAS and English language learners, only about 5% of Massachusetts students are ELL. The vast majority of these students attend urban public schools or urban charter schools. Non-urban charters have seen little growth in their enrollment of ELLs. They enroll less than a quarter of ELLs compared to traditional public schools. Almost 40% of the ELL enrollment in the Boston charter schools is attributable to one school out of the 19 within the city. And over the 5 years since the Achievement Act passed, 2 ELL students have taken the MCAS exams at Sturgis Charter and none at Boston Collegiate Charter, which I found pretty interesting. And the Achievement Gap Act was created in 2010, which I'm sure most of you know, to improve student performance across the Commonwealth. SPED population within charter schools. Across the charter sector, schools serve fewer special education students than the TPSs, both in number of students and as a proportion of their enrollment. SPED is at 12% in charter schools compared to 16% in TPSs. And most SPED students in charter schools have either a specific learning disability or a communications impairment. And while they might be mild to severe disabilities depending upon the student, given the charters provide services through full inclusion, an assumption can be made that most of these students have mild disabilities, whereas TPSs educate students in all disability categories. It's also important to note that charter schools have no students in substantially separate programs. So full inclusion means that students in general education are in general education classrooms for all or most of the day, whereas substantially separate means that they are rarely in the general ed classes. And finally, urban charter schools have lower percentages of SPED students from their TPS counterparts. So here just is one graphic that I found interesting. It shows urban districts and urban charters. The charters are the blue and the districts are the purple, and it kind of just shows you the differences, understandably, given the amount of TPSs versus charter schools in the Commonwealth, but interesting nonetheless. And then this other graphic just shows I know it's hard to read, but it speaks to the differences in SPED and urban TPSs, which is the green, and urban charters, which is the blue. The wording on the right is broken down by disability: learning disabled, communication impairment, emotional disturbance, developmentally delayed, autism, and intellectual disability. And so SPED students, urban charters are not educating the same categories of SPED students as their counterpart districts, and over 90% of the population is educated by the TPSs. So, given the literature that I've reviewed and presented, in order to proceed with determining what type of students are filling charter school seats and how it impacts standardized testing, I intend to focus my research, aside from what I've already done, by reading previously written reports, which I'll continue to do throughout the life of the project. I'll also do some sampling, such as interviews of charter school parents, students, teachers, and administrators, to better understand the charter school culture and why a charter was chosen by the students or the parents. The poolers, samplers would ideally be from different parts of the state, a few from Western Mass, a few from the Cape area, middle regions, etc. But each interview from each charter would have the same individuals, meaning an administrator, a parent, a teacher, etc. I also would propose to do observation. I'm already going to charter schools for the sampling across the state, but I would like to go during the school day in order to observe what kinds of students are attending, how classes are taught, and get sort of a general idea of the climate. I think it would be ideal to visit some of the schools during standardized testing preparation and leading up to the test day to see what the charter schools do versus what TPSs do. My family is comprised of all public school educators, and I was a part of MCAS growing up, so I have a great idea of that, but really understanding charter schools would be ideal as well, and to really see who's sitting in those seats. So the policy implication: who cares? So what? While charter schools are reportedly doing great things for students, it's evident, particularly given all the media attention as of late within Boston, to better understand who's being better served at these schools and whether or not the reported enrollment is benefiting all those underserved elsewhere is really important, I think, here. And given the positive standardized test scores that have been reported by charter schools, some parents might elect to apply to go to a charter school for their child, but then be disappointed in the results because their child didn't fit the mold. Again, charter schools are a great public school option, but my proposal for this research clearly shows that there may be some limitations and variances among SPED, low-income, and ELL populations, which are skewing the results of testing, thus implying an apples-to-apples comparison to the traditional public schools, when in reality it's just not that clear. Given the positive results, again, that have been expressed throughout this presentation regarding charter schools, it would be a disservice to those who are underserved in other facets, those who are currently taking part in standardized testing throughout the Commonwealth, to not further examine the enrollment trends and standardized testing data within the charter schools in order to decipher whether a change in the policy is needed or not. So thanks everybody for listening. I look forward to hearing your feedback. Bye-bye.